Well, it's column day, so we're going to take a look at seeing if we can build the columns for the bed using my experimental method, let's say, using these concrete tubes. So this is a cardboard tube. It's meant for footings for like decks, things like that. It is essentially 16 inches, but not really. So something to know about this if you do try to use this method. The 16 inch on this is the interior diameter, but that's a nominal width, meaning it's kind of 16 inches. It's within a margin of error, 16 inches. When they make these, the machine actually makes several different diameters that are around 16. Some are a little bigger, some are a little smaller. And then it cuts them so that they're all pure columns, they're not like tapered or anything. And the reason they do that is for shipping. So they can stack several of these together, because if they were all exactly the same width, you'd have to ship them as one long tube. It'd be super inefficient for the stores to rack and everything else. And if you're doing footings, it doesn't really matter if they're slightly off. For our project, it very much does matter if they're slightly off. So what I ended up doing at my store is going through and pulling off about 20 of these off the racks and finding 3 that were from the same portion of that process, the same width. That puts mine at about 15 3/8 of an inch wide. So 16 inches is really 15 3/8. What I've then done is I've used the same tool that I used before, so my little compass basically, and I've measured this at 7 11/16, which puts me at 15 3/8 for my diameter. And then I've gone through and actually drawn that circle on this piece of scrap. This is from the door, the side entry door rather. So there's enough room here for me to make 2 of these discs. If you're not going to do a drawbridge, then that big piece of scrap that's over there is going to work as well to do 2 more. You're going to need several of these. Might have to buy another piece of plywood. We'll kind of see how we go. I've got a bunch of scrap here in the garage that I can use. I'm going to try to leverage some of that. Basically though, what we're going to do is we're going to cut these discs out and we're going to fit these discs inside the tube. And the reason we're doing that is I need to cut down the side of this tube and actually turn this into a wedge shape, kind of like a Pac-Man shape, in order to allow it to sit over that corner. And when I do that, it's going to lose all sorts of strength and it's going to try to twist and go a little bit weird. So this is going to allow it to be stable and maintain its shape. And I'll show you how we're going to do that. For this then, one of these 2 discs that I'm going to cut for that column, I'm going to actually cut out the square, cut out the corner that's going to sit over the edge of the castle. The other one I'm going to leave solid, and I'm actually going to modify my design a little bit to bring this down 3/4 of an inch so that when that column sits, it has a platform to rest on, and then I can screw it in and secure it by just running a couple pocket holes up kind of through the plywood to hold the tower in place. So when I do the plans for this, which I will attach in the description, I'll make sure to accommodate that. So if you're looking at my printed plans, you should see that there's a notch here. For us, I haven't bolted anything together yet, so I'll just disconnect this, line it off, and just cut this out, which should go pretty easy. So I'm going to experiment with this now. I'm going to cut out my discs. I'll get my columns built and kind of test fit everything, and then check back in when I've got things sort of rough fit so you can see how it's looking. Took a little bit of fine tuning, but our disc is cut and fits. And the nice thing about using this method with my little compass is we know exactly where the center of the disc is, because that's the little point hole that the compass used. So I just took the square and lined it up on that center point, and I'm able to cut out the wedge and know that I'll hit the exact center of the column. So I'm going to cut that out, and I'm going to use that as a basis for marking this tube, because none of this is actually hooked in, that's just laying in there. But I need to cut down the sides of this tube to open up that wedge so that when I do slide it over, one, it fits kind of keyed over the side of the castle, but also you'll be able to access through this little port and be able to get into the shelf and everything. So when I'm all done, there's going to be that one on the bottom, that one on the top, and there will be one about midway down as well that will form the basis of that shelf for my daughter to put stuff on when this is all said and done. So my Pac-Man is cut, and it reveals a problem with my design. I'm a big fan of, with these videos, trying to show you kind of my process and the little adjustments I have to make. So just as an experiment, I laid this on here, and you can see I'm gonna have an issue. There's a gap. And the problem is when I cut this hole, I didn't account for that piece of reinforcement pushed everything that way 3/4 of an inch and has me coming outside of the edge of my tower. I also didn't account for that piece of reinforcement. So what I'm going to do to combat this is I'm actually going to cut on, brace this with my knee so I can use my other hand. I'm going to cut this back 3/4 of an inch, so the entire notch. I'm going to extend this and then cut that way. So I'll cut out another 3/4 of an inch here. That'll give me that clearance and get me all the way to the corner. And then I'm going to notch out an additional 3/4 inch piece to account for that support. I'm left with kind of a keyed shape that should click over that and allow me to close fully this gap without causing too much of a problem. I will account for that in the plans as well, so you won't have to do that, or shouldn't have to if you measure everything correctly. Just since I'm designing this as I build it, something I learned. So I have my modified disc. I did test fit it, fits perfect. So now I've got that placed in the tube. I marked where the corners are and used a square to draw the lines down. And that's going to be the wedge I'm going to cut out of this tube. And then once that's cut, I'll place this back in, line up the edges, and I'm going to nail around the outside corner, and that'll give this the stability and the kind of rigid core that it needs. Between the top one, or actually this will be the bottom one, it's all flipped over, but between the end caps and the one I'll do in the center, it should be nice and stable and solid. So my tube has been cut. I've taken my kind of keyed piece that's going to be the bottom and relined everything up and used I think they're 1-inch brad nails, went all the way around the side. I haven't put the bottom one in yet because I still have to recess that, but that's enough for us to do a test. Just with the one board, it's actually pretty stable as a column. So I'm going to do now, I measured everything, just key that over, and if I can get back far enough, our castle has a column. So next step then, I'm going to kind of measure. You can see that my tower is a little bit taller than the rest of my castle, which is actually a good thing because I'm going to be expanding this up over the level of the bottom part of the bed. So I wanted it to be taller because I didn't want that seam to line up. So I'm going to measure down from this edge to figure out where that piece, that top cap would actually sit. So I'm not going to cut down the entire 3/4, probably end up only going, from the look of it, about a 1/2 inch down. So I will kind of use that piece there, cut that off, cut this off, and then I should be able to put the cap on this and place the whole thing in and just easily secure it with a couple pocket screws here, and then just some regular screws down at the bottom, and my tower will be attached to the side of the castle. Do the same thing on the other side. I've already gone through before I nailed it and used my previous piece as a template. So I've got this one already set and ready to be cut out. I know that that'll fit on the opposite side, and then I'll use that as my template to cut out the top disc as well. So now that the column is ready to be attached, we're going to venture into the making life too difficult for myself. I want a shelf right there, and I want it to overlap the sides so that it kind of comes into here and then wraps out around. And I want it to be nice and smooth. So I bought this 18-inch kind of edge glued round panel. It's a project panel. You can find something like this at most craft or like home improvement stores. And what I've done is I've measured the inside edge and marked it here. So this is roughly the side of the frame that you see down there. This will be the overhang for my shelf. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this. So I'll cut out the outside first. And then for this inside shelf, I'm going to cut there and there. So you're left with a shape that steps back and will lay right on that little frame. That should allow me to have the shelf that I want and have it nice and smooth. And then I just have to figure out the piece on the inside of the tower that will interface here and go around so that I can then nail it to the outside of the tower and have one contiguous shelf going back in nice and smooth for my daughter to put stuff on. So here's my cutout piece. And if I did this right, I should be able to flip it over. And it should sit right in there like that. So that'll form the front of the shelf. For the inside shelf, what I'm doing is using the round that will be the bottom of my other tower, and I'm lining up the inside cut here and here. That's going to match with the outer walls of the main castle itself. I don't have to worry about the notch or anything. What I'm going to do is draw a circle around the outside of this and use this as the template to determine what the inside disc needs to be for that tower. And then I should be able to get it all lined up, place that in. It should line up straight with the cuts that I have on the inside of this piece. And then I'll be able to, just screw them together basically. Took a little bit of fine tuning, but the shelf is in. So you can kind of see how it overlaps and links together. There's a small gap kind of between the two panels. Once it's all assembled, I'll just fill that with a little bit of putty and just touch up the paint a bit, just so there's no corners or anything like that. I'm not overly worried about it. This does come apart, so the way I have it built, this can just be separated so that it can be brought up in multiple pieces and then placed back together. If I do have to putty that, then when it's taken apart again, if this piece is actually removed, it'll just crack the putty. Not a big deal. Once you have the shelf placed and nailed around the side, you can remove the tower from the side of the castle. The next step is going to be to go around the top piece and put several of these little chunks of 1x3 or scrap plywood. You can just glue them. They don't have to really hold a lot of weight, but you want to line them up right against the edge of the wood. And what this is going to allow us to do is take one of our remaining 2 tubes, cut a 1-foot section out of it, and then that's going to slide directly over these little pegs, and we'll be able to nail it in and hold it. We're then going to take one of the edge panels that we have, do the exact same thing. So I've drawn the inside line or the inside mark of where that tube will be. I'm gluing a couple chunks of 1x3 all the way around, and then this is going to serve as the cap. So essentially, my extension is going to come up from here, and then a cap will sit on the top. So this is our end goal assembled. I'm going to do a few things up on the top as far as like a cone and a few things like that. I'll figure that out later, but the main structure is completely attached and ready to go. I'll have to do a little bit of cleanup when I sand it just to make the tubes smooth and connect together. But all of this is completely disassemblable. It'll be able to be put together with a couple screws on the inside just to hold everything together. So the 4 sides will come up and the towers will come up separate and all screwed together on the other side. Our next piece is going to be to deal with the kind of the front elevation and the top, but we're going to do that in the next segment. That's going to wrap up this video. Like I said, the next one will deal with the front elevation, the little towers that are going to go on the front, the top, probably put together the back and do a few pieces like that. After that, really, it's just about cleaning this up and painting it. So I'm going to build the other tower. It goes on that side using the same method as this one. Should be easier now that I've figured out how to do it. And like every other video, I guess we'll end this out with a dad joke. So since we're building structures here, what's the tallest building in any city or state? It's always the library, always. And if you don't believe me, I challenge you to find a single building in any city that has more stories in it than a library. Have a great day, guys. We'll see you next time.